Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Dr. Joe Salustio back with you on another episode, and I am recording this, if you can believe it, from Cartagena, Colombia, in my hotel room. And I have to tell you, I said, if I ever get a chance to meet my guest today, I will make sure that I am there. And then I come to find out that I'm literally out of the country, and there is nothing I can do about it because I have to get the keynote at our Latin American Caribbean user conference. And I said, oh man, I'm just going to have to do it by Zoom and then hope for another in-person meeting. So to make this the podcast that it needs to be, I had to go find a co-host, the co-host of co-hosts that could enhance this conversation and is actually in person with our guest, if you could believe it, as they have a party with me not there, which is just so disappointing. Ladies and gentlemen, here she is. She's fantastic. She is actually a real live superhero. She is Laura Ibsen, the chief executive officer, CEO extraordinaire. I was going to throw in a bunch of adjectives, but I didn't get there. Laura Ibsen of Elucian. How are you?
Joe, I'm great. Even better to be here with Paul in our Reston, Virginia headquarters office.
Now, Laura, let me interrupt you because you've just made the rookie mistake of being a co-host, and you've co-hosted with me multiple times, which is to never say the name of the guest before I intro them. So
I get first mover advantage, Joe. That's what you need to know. So
also, from a technical standpoint, you are my boss. There really isn't anything I can do about it. I mean, it's really what you want to say. Our guest today is an esteemed higher education leader. In fact, he's a trailblazer. When I say his name, you're going to know who he is. He's been a part of associations. He's helped grow one of the leading universities in the U.S. and the world. Let me bring him in right now. He's Dr. Paul LeBlanc. He is the co-founder and board chair of Human Systems and the former president of Southern New Hampshire University. Paul, welcome back to an EdUp Mike. How are you?
It's great to be back with you, Joe, especially now that I get to do it with Laura on my side.
Really amazing to have you both together without me there. I'll probably say that a few times more. But Paul, just remind our listeners, you were the episode 400 of the EdUp Experience. And as I was going through this with you, and I started to see the memory of that episode come back, and then I played some sound effects for you, and you went, aha, I remember. So
it all comes back.
Right. Now it all came crazy coming back.
Surprise.
All you needed is a little jolt of a reminder. But listen, I'm really disappointed that I can't meet you in person. It would have been an honor. You've done so much in higher education. You've written multiple books, which I'm going to ask you to tell us about your books in a minute. But right now you're at Human Systems, and I think it's really a good place for us to start, for you to talk about Human Systems. What are you all doing now? And maybe a little bit about your transition from higher education to now dealing with Human Systems.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It's just great to be with you both. The transition after 21 years of leading SNHU, and it is now at 250,000 learners, the largest university in the U.S. That was not, as you might imagine, an easy transition because I love that place. I love that place so much. I think you know this. I love that place so much that I have the logo tattooed on my arm.
Do you not? Do you really?
I do, and I got
that's amazing.
And your listeners will not be able to see it, but Joe, you can see it.
I can validate that this is true.
So I told as my CMO, I unveiled this at the goodbye party on campus with a couple of thousand of our colleagues and their families, and I said to our CMO, "You better not change this logo. This is literally blood paid to get this logo on my arm." But
it takes a while to heal too.
It takes a while to heal, but it's an institution that I really that I fell in love with. And I fell in love with its mission and its dedication to students who are often not very well served by some of the incumbent system. We have lots of good colleague institutions out there, of course. But it was time. 21 years is a long time, and I think fresh perspective. And also, I was very excited about how AI now enters into our society, and I'm in the camp that thinks it changes everything. I mean, everything. And how do you sit back on the sidelines when that's happening and not want to be part of that and not want to be subject to others telling us how that should play out in higher ed, but rather join with colleagues to help shape that future. I think we have to own that future. So human systems about to be renamed because our lawyers tell us we can't trademark that name. There are too many other variations. So
You didn't tattoo that one on. You didn't tattoo that one.
I didn't get that on the. Didn't get a tattoo yet. Will now be called Matter in Space.
Say it again.
Matter in Space is the name.
Matter in Space. Interesting.
Space, and and it's actually the root of the definitional root of universe. The universe is everything made up of matter and space, and the root of university, of course. Yeah. So it's been, and I was able to, team up with George Siemens, who's a longtime friend and colleague, and I think one of the great innovators and thinkers in higher ed, certainly in the world of AI and education. And we were having coffee together and bemoaning the fact that we felt like people just seem to be grappling with how big this is. Like, this changes everything, what universities do, what learning looks like big existential questions. And at the end of that 2-hour coffee conversation, I said, George, no one knows this yet, but I'm going to be leaving my role. How about you come join me, leave your role, and let's try to reinvent learning together. That's all. Just reinvent learning together. So that was the impetus of what is now Matter in Space. And just I'll finish by saying, when people say, well, what is it? It's actually a question. And the question is, if we have a clean sheet of paper with no assumptions, no expectations about accreditation, Title IV, or roles, but a generally clean sheet of paper, how would we reinvent learning for the age of AI in ways that relentlessly uses AI, but puts learners and relationship, kind of humanity at the center of the equation? So that's what we're trying to sort out.
And Paul, as you had that first conversation, I think a little bit of what you talked about is for humanity to really flourish with AI. As you looked at making this move, where do you see humanity with AI today? Like, what's the baseline that we're working from? The next couple of years, I think, we have a roadmap and Lucian with what we're doing, but then I think, who's going to get us to the 10 years out? And we need thought leaders like you and George.
Yeah, you kind of say it. I think that we're all grappling, right? Crystal balls and notoriously faulty. But I do think that where we are today actually is a place of a lot of anxiety and fear, and a lot of it not unjustified. I mean, we all have seen the movie The Terminator, right? And we know how this could go sideways. And when we think about it in an educational context, what matters more than the care of our learners? So we don't want to see AI ill-used. But I think it's actually even more basic. I think people are afraid of, will this displace my job? Will other be a role for me in the future? What does that look like? And what about the things that I'm with a career to, like understanding my field? What happens to the concept of expertise when human beings may not be the most expert entities on the planet any longer in large areas of knowledge making, production, and consumption? So I think those are really big existential questions. I am actually, and I share those fears sometimes, but I've come to actually believe in a much more optimistic view of what's possible with AI. I think we can now start to put education, like the best quality learning experiences, in the hands of people who have no access to it. Whether that's someone in an underserved community within the U.S. or it's someone who is deprived of higher ed by dint of finance or other circumstance. But around the globe, then millions, tens, hundreds of millions of people who don't have access to high quality learning. And when I think about that learning, I think we have an opportunity to do so in a much more holistic way, such that we're now thinking about wellness and well-being and human skills and soft skills. Because frankly, in an age of AI, those are the skills that are going to be more important. And when I say that, it quickly becomes framed as, for many people, so that's what will be left for us to do. It's a kind of scarcity framing. Like, AI will do all the important, cool stuff, and we're going to be left to tending the farm. And I actually think it's a different framing that I have today, which is, I actually think the information economy is way overrated in terms of the health of human beings. Stuart Russell, who's the computer scientist at Berkeley, does some amazing lectures for the BBC called Beat Lectures, if you have a chance. He says, imagine if we had said to our ancestors a few hundred years ago, and I'm paraphrasing, you'll get up every day, you'll go to work in a big box. Now, it's called an office building, but it's essentially a big box. You'll go inside and sit in a small glass box. They'll call that a cubicle, but you'll see it's a box. And you'll stare all day at a little lit-up box filled with monitor. They would have run screaming in the other direction. And the jobs that bring status in the information economy tend not to be the jobs that are deeply engaged with human beings and community, in nurturing. And my optimistic view is that AI may take over a lot of the knowledge economy jobs, and that will be painful. It's going to be a huge disruption. We should talk about what that transition will look like. But then what it will free us to do is move towards a care economy of caring. And that would mean that we would all of a sudden start to flip the jobs become important. So right now, an analyst in a financial services company makes a hell of a lot more money than an early childhood educator. And what we all know is early childhood educators do the most important work in society.
Yes.
Right? And all of a sudden, we could flood our K-12 schools with amazing teachers and coaches and counselors and social workers and pay them well and support them. We could rebuild a mental health care system that has been decimated in America. It doesn't exist really, except for the very, very privileged. We use our prisons instead, right? We could create a care. Anyone who's caring for an elderly parent right now knows that we don't have a system of affordable, compassionate, caring geriatric care. For a society that's rapidly, there's so much human need, and all of it would make us better. All of it would make our society better, our communities better. We would feel better working in such environments. David Graeber, one of my favorite writers, an anarchist economist, which is a great combination, passed away a couple of years ago. His last book was called Bullshit Jobs. And he cites the research that says 65% of people believe that if they stopped doing their job tomorrow, no one would notice. What a soul-deadening way to spend a big chunk of your life and work that you think, that has zero impact. So Laura, when I have said this in various times, people say, well, great, but how are we going to pay for all those teachers? How are we going to pay for this? And I think this is where we will see a massive change in the nature of our society and economy of the kind that Carlota Perez talks about. Carlota Perez is a Venezuelan English economist, and she talks about what happens when a big paradigm shifting technology comes into a society. And what she says happens is that you go through a very messy transition, often a painful one, like governments fall, wars happen, winners become losers, losers become winners. But at the end of that messy transition, the world is remade. And imagine a world that we could remake in which we actually pay teachers, we actually pay social workers, we actually pay the people who work in the mental health care system. We aren't willing to pay very much for high levels of expertise that machines can do now at a fraction of the cost. And I can give you examples if we want to make that more concrete. So we will have to reorder society, but it has happened historically.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about massive economic shifts aligned to technology shifts, I've been in the age of networking and internet, but huge amounts of jobs were transformed, new jobs were created. Yep. As we look at this, fourth industrial revolution and what's happening with AI, we've already heard that 1 billion jobs are going to need 1 billion people have to be reskilled by 2030, according to the World Economic Forum.
Yep. And
it feels like we know a lot about the what, but how are we going to do that? How are we going to respond? Certainly Southern New Hampshire with your leadership and has really moved down the path of the transformation of learning. You've been there in the early stages of AI, but I feel like we're not there's a lot of what that AI will answer, but how sees more of the human side, the caring side of how are we going to make this transition? And at the same time, we all know that governments and economies and policy will matter. And there will be a lot of resistors to change if it means disrupting jobs that have been highly valued to jobs that, quite frankly, society hasn't been valued to.
That's right. And I think we will soon see, we're starting to see seeds of a massive backlash. We will see regulatory impediments or brakes on all of this. I don't think they will last long. I don't think they will hold up, but it will make it feel in the next couple of years that AI is having less impact than all the blood. And I think we will look up in 5 years as actually how the world has changed. It's a sort of short version of that old axiom that it's always less change than you think will happen in the next 2 years, but a lot more change than will happen in 10 years, right? So I think it's actually going to happen faster, and you're seeing it already. So how we get there is such a complicated thing, and we're early. I think you have to start with, whether you're leading an institution or you're a policymaker, you have to have a theory of the world. Like, what is your theory about AI? What do you think is true of it? So if you think, a billion people will have to be reskilled, you have a theory of the world that says these jobs will continue, but they will be altered in some ways, dramatic ways, and AI will be your kind of very smart intern. Your algorithmic assistant's always at your side. How do you think massive numbers of jobs will absolutely just go away? That's more radical vision. That's a harder thing to grasp. So your theory of the world starts, for me, these are the things that I have started to develop conviction around. So one is that learning will be less about epistemological questions of knowledge. What do you know? What do you need to know? And they're going to be more ontological questions of being. So how do you want to be in the world? What do you want your community to be like? Where's your place? Where will you have impact? These are different questions. Universities pretend. They don't pretend. They care about those questions, but they're secondary. Universities are built around a basic question, and we frame it as the major, the college major. The question is, what do I need to know to be an X? What do I need to know to be a lawyer? What do I need to know to be a nurse? I think that's what a major is at the end, right? And those are going to be not very interesting questions in the future, I think. And I do think that another sort of conviction, so I have a series of these, and they don't cohere because we're early, but another one is that we will be much less about the products we build than the processes we use to get there. So right now, when we're educating somebody, so I'd be like, I need you to learn how to write a marketing plan. You're in a marketing class. And today, we would have you writing marketing plans. I think really what we want to do is, what are the prompts? What are the ways you directed your AI to create a marketing plan? What were the questions you needed to ask? What are the parameters? And if you are poor in that, that's a high-level cognitive question. And when it produced it, how did you assess it? What were the questions you asked of it? And when it made those changes, how did you know it was good? So if you watch students today using AI to write papers, they're terrible. AI is not particularly.
And you know that they're very.
You're kind of like, wait a minute, this is like not very good. You see it in your colleagues' emails sometimes too. But what I would say, I was a writing teacher and I had this debate with writing faculty. So we want to ban the use of AI. I was like, you want to ban the tools that will get these kids jobs? Like, that makes no sense. Like, this is what they'll be using in the future. But what I did say is, I would say, you can use AI to write the paper. In fact, I encourage you to do so. But give me 3 appendices. I want the first one to be the prompts you use to generate the paper. I want the second one to be a list of the things you did to make that better. What did you ask it? What did you notice of it? How did you improve it? Whether you did it yourself or you used AI. And then the third thing is, I would want you to show me how any statements of fact were checked for veracity. When the AI said X, how did you know that was right? How did you check that? Those are the things. Those are the skills that learners will need. And those are very high. The cognitive bar just got higher.
Well, I think
let me jump in real fast, Laura, because I want to just double down on this. Quick story in my recent past, because we're very future. When we think about artificial intelligence, we think towards the future. But I think many people are going through stages of grief, which is why I think our personal adoption, it's almost like we're going through anger and acceptance, especially as we internalize how AI is going to affect us. And we talk about adoption, and we know that there is inertia within institutions, even within ourselves, to adopt AI. And so I want to give you this quick story because I think you're going to appreciate it. Very recently, I was in a meeting, faculty meeting, a curriculum committee meeting, which I know you remember. And the discussion was around why we're developing an AI degree, a master's degree in artificial intelligence, why the course could not be named prompt engineering. The pushback was from the engineering faculty, who said, you can't name a course prompt engineering. Your students will think they're going to be an engineer, and it's not really engineering. And so then you have your practical people going, but this is what it's called. And so the recommendation was to call it prompt creation. And so when I said, you want me to go sell a program to a student and actually not call what they're doing what they're doing, that's a failure to adopt what it actually is. And it made me sit back and go, wow, the adoption curves for us as individuals are just off the charts. No alignment. We're all on our own individual journeys, right?
Yeah. And this is where I think university leadership really needs to think about how they move out. I think of it as sort of 3 time frames. And the immediate need right now is a thoroughgoing review of every part of the curriculum to say, where do I need to integrate AI tools so my students are prepared when they go out into the world? Like every faculty member, department chair, and dean should be looking at the curriculum and saying, am I giving students the knowledge? Are we up to date? Are they equipped with the tools they need to be equipped with? And as you saw about 3 weeks ago, there was a survey that said like 75% of last May's graduates feel that their universities did not equip them for the workforce in terms of AI. Coincidentally, in the same week, the survey of employers revealed that something like 75% of employers said, I won't hire somebody today if they don't have familiarity facility with AI tools. Well, that is a pretty stark gap between the two worlds.
It is. And it's not just in higher ed. Across the Lucian, all of my organizations are showing how are we using AI to be productive and how are we using it in the capacity of which we are building our products, our delivery. So how will it make us more productive? We know what we need to do, but it's the how are we going to get there? How are we governing it? That is really important to see before.
Really important. And I think so to that point, the most immediate work facing most institutions is the most important question always. Are we preparing our students well? Are we serving them well? And not say, are we giving them the right tools? Because the number one reason they continue to come to us is to have a career. So are we equipping them for that? I think the medium level question goes to that. What do you think, what is your theory of the future? And what do you think will happen in workforce? Because you need to start thinking differently about what majors you offer. Like I wouldn't be making big bets on accounting. I don't think PwC has invested $3 billion in AI so they can hire more accountants.
No, the same thing. If you listen to Maurice Fonzi, who was at ELI talking about the future of AI, I was sitting next to my general counsel, and he's like, lawyers gone. Like a lot of the legal profession is going to change dramatically.
Absolutely.
And I guess one of my questions in higher education, what happens to our tenured professors that are the gurus and the knowledge base of everything? How will those roles transform also?
Yeah, we use tenured professors differently. So I think for those who are researchers, and society needs universities to play that important research, creators of research, right? That's an important role. And now they're superpowers. They can ask questions they could dream about asking. If you read the now often cited Science magazine article about protein folding in DeepMind, using DeepMind, researchers did in a day what previously took teams of people 10 years to do. Research said, I never thought in my lifetime we would solve for this. And now we're doing it all in a year. Like, this is the stuff of major medical breakthroughs. So our researchers will be superpowered across disciplines. But if you're talking about
the human flourishing, if we can do that, we can solve some of the most challenging diseases. There are glioblastomas move so quickly. There are limited amount of cases around the world. There's global research teams. So if you can speed that up, proteins mutate so quickly. How does that solve for the toughest, most deadly diseases that we face?
That's right. And I think there are books around climate change, like big, intractable, wicked problems now all of a sudden we can think about them differently because we have tools that were not available to us. So that'll be incredibly important. But to go back to your question, if you are a teaching faculty member whose primary task is knowledge transfer, your world's about to change. It won't change in the next 2 years.
Right, you can accept it and embrace it.
Well, I think, this is the question of what is the future of the role of faculty. And look at I'm going to give you three names: Mark Schlaffman, Elizabeth Collins, and Helen Heinemann, my 6th grade teacher, my 12th grade teacher, and my favorite undergraduate faculty member. And I can name them,
Good memory.
all three of them, because they transformed my life.
Yeah.
And when we think of the best teachers, in fact, if you ask most people, list the 10 people who've been most influential in your life. Teachers are almost always in the top 5. And we remember them because, not because they were particularly good knowledge transfer people, because they were good in class. Though I think all three of them were. I don't really remember them for that. What I remember them for is that they actually took the time to know me. I felt like I mattered to them. It's the first chapter of my book, Broken. It's called Mattering. You can't transform lives, and learning is really at its best about transformation unless you're in a relationship with someone. And those teachers, and I ask this question all the time, put your hands up. Give me the number of teachers you had that fit this bill, that fit this description that I have with mine. They made me feel like I mattered. They gave me their time. They could adjust to how I was in the moment. I could walk in to talk about an exam. They could look at me and say, Paul, you look on the source. What's going on? And they actually meant it. They cared. They lifted my sights. They expected more of me, right? So they didn't fall into the trap of a poverty of aspiration, which I think sometimes happens to a lot of learners. How many teachers do most people have? When I ask them to raise their hand and show me on their fingers, some people use 2 hands. Rarely is that the case. They have just 3.
I'm there too, Mr. Jordan.
Yeah. How many do you have, John?
Linda Hart, my lab.
Linda Hart.
Linda Hart, my lab teacher.
Well,
She was just so passionate. We sang songs in Latin. I mean,
I love it. Yeah.
And so definitely, I mean, there's Mr. Clancy, my 5th grade teacher. I mean, he's the one that stands out to me just because of the impact he had. And, you know, the teachers get you in your most formative years too, because you're around them, right? So for the exposure you have, but that it's interesting that you bring that up, because when you talk about individualization, which is where I think higher education is, we've moved from personalized to really individualized, at least from a student perspective. They expect this individualization, and AI can enhance individual journeys through higher education. But there's a balance, and I actually remember some of the questions I asked you. It's very interesting as I interview presidents, and I remember certain things that they say. And I asked you about
hold on. I know you use AI to go back and look at all your podcasts of all the insights.
I transcribe them, and I use that transcription for search engine optimization. But I do remember, Farrah, thanks for calling me out live here on the EdUp Experience podcast. But I do remember I asked you about Southern New Hampshire's growth and how you maintain the innovative spirit with the bureaucracy that higher ed naturally creates. And so artificial intelligence, we always come back to this point. We know, you know, I know, Laura knows, institutions even know, we have to adopt this. There's going to be some detractors, but we know. But the structure of our industry is designed to prevent that innovation from taking hold in many ways. How do you balance? What's your advice from your years growing one of the biggest institutions in the world in terms of balancing innovative spirit and bureaucracy?
It's such a great question, Joe. And I think this is where I always go back to my old friend Clay Christensen, who was a friend of 4 years and was on my board, was a trustee emeritus. And, you know, what Clay would say is that for the uses of AI and innovation, they're about improving quality, being more efficient. You really have to work with your people. You do this internally. You give them tools, supports, guidance, give them space and time and resources, and encourage them to play and then to try and then test. And you know, there's so much good work we can do in those spaces. When you're asking your institution to rethink the way it plays the game, it's a different question.
Yeah, it is.
So the first 2 kinds of innovation, whether it's quality or efficiency, productivity, those are questions about playing the game the way you always played it, but playing it better or playing it more efficiently. But the third bucket, what Clay famously defined disruptive innovation, is actually about reinventing the game. I don't just want to play it the same way. And institutions really struggled to do that. Like that was what his research showed. And it wasn't because anyone was being a jerk. There's no ill intent in this. It is the organizational dynamic that the existing organization either, treats that kind of innovation the way the body treats foreign tissue. It either wants to spin it or it wants to incorporate it in its own way. So what Clay would say, the approach we've always taken is we always been doing that kind of innovation. You split up a small group. The leader's job is to give them space and buffer. You don't make a huge investment, right? You don't build a battleship, but you get a small group of really smart and you give them permission to play by different rules. So when SNHU, when we really wanted to grow online, I moved that small team of 18 people away from the campus. I mean, literally out of sight, out of mind. I navigated more rules within more space in our governance so they could try some different things. I got them some resources. We tested a whole bunch of things, and then we grew. When I wanted to create College for America, which was our competency-based program, the online was like, we'll do it. I was like, nope, I know exactly how this plays. Like, you will make it look like online. I want it to look something quite different. They didn't like it, and it wasn't because they weren't smart or committed and they thought they couldn't do it, but I knew that the dynamic would be swimming upstream. So we split off a group, moved them to a slightly different location, and gave them permission. And now as we move into a more radical version of AI, SNHU is rolling AI out across the organization, as most universities are today. And that's kind of they're going to do things better, they're going to do more efficiently, they're going to see cost reductions, etc. But the investment they made in matter and space, my company, is the clean sheet of paper, a different group, get them off the radar screen and let them go reinvent the game again. And that's what we're trying to do over here. So I think the best institutions and organizations in terms of innovation have to think through this cycle of what kind of innovation, it requires a different playbook, and where do I position it within the large organization. And when I was talking about I lost the track of my sort of three phases for university leaders. Think about how to change in your curriculum today and what tools you need to give students. The middle is think about the future of majors workforce and how you need to change your portfolio. But the third is, do you have space to create a small team who can rethink your actual existence as an organization?
And Paul, across the customers we serve, almost 4,000, we're not seeing next wave yet. We are going to show what we are seeing. We've just completed our annual AI survey for higher education. So, spoiler alert, we will be sharing some of the insights around adoption and opinions on that. But I think everyone's got to get that third piece in to sort of think differently, to move something out. It's absolutely the way that we created our first AI capability called Journey, which you know about. Looking across the curriculum and showing students what skill sets they build tied directly to jobs that they can go and get. And we only achieve that because using the Jeffrey Moore model, who wrote Zone to Win, Crossing the Chasm, we isolated an innovation.
Yeah.
We put ring-fenced the resources, and we moved quickly. We sent that team led by Sonia Khan and Mike Wolf, our head of product technology, think differently, do something new. Then innovation moved out quickly. And now we're just going to get first adoption with George Washington University. So it is evidence that while all of us are thinking about productivity and working differently, innovation is going to happen because we already have seen the challenges in higher education here in the U.S. With the enrollment cliff, with the FAFSA debacle. Everyone's getting disrupted. So how do you see higher education being able to get to that beyond productivity and using it in the day-to-day, some of the job changes to truly disrupting themselves? And is it even possible?
Yeah. Well, is it possible to disrupt yourself is, of course, such a hard thing to do. Great examples of that, frankly.
Sometimes the answer is a lot, but it's probably mobilizing for another disruption.
And that's right. It's funny because sometimes I run into folks at conferences who say, hey, we've been looking, we're moving it online, looking at what you guys have done. It's such a great case study. We want to sort of emulate what you've done. It's like, you really should do that because SNHU is already trying to think about how it disrupts itself. Like, you got to sort of go past where we are today. Don't use our old playbook, sort out the playbook that makes sense for the future as it's evolving and emerging for us. And I do think that, look at higher ed doesn't go through disruptive off the cliff dynamics. It goes through a lot of chaos right now, as you said, FAFSA and all kinds of stuff and the enrollment cliff. But But the reality is that, like healthcare, it is a regulated industry with a massive third-party payer, which is the federal government. So it's never going to go over that overnight. All of a sudden, we look up and the world looks different. But it is going through astounding sort of change. I raise that point because there's no need to get panicky. There is time. We are going to we are early. We will see backlash. It will slow things down. But in some ways, that time shouldn't be squandered. It's a place where universities and university leaders, people who care about higher ed, can come together to say, in this time and space we have, how do we pull people together and start thinking about the future? What does that look like? Where can that happen? Yeah, I do think that, sometimes there'll be universities that have the means to do that, but they're the ones who will be least able to be disrupted. So Stanford, Michigan, have enormous capabilities there. Guess who the last places in the world to actually fundamentally change will be Stanford, Michigan. Not because there's anything about them, because everything's right with that. They're in such a good place. Yeah. All right. I always said, Larry Bacow, when he was president of Harvard, is a friend, and I used to say, Larry, you can't innovate. You get too much money and too much esteem, status, too much tradition. It's really hard for a place like that to innovate. But that was a great example. They created edX with MIT, not by trying to do it inside. They funded a group outside of Harvard and MIT to go off and do this thing. We could talk about how successful or not it was, but that's a good example. So I do hope that, we will see organizations finding space, collaborating. It'd be easy to imagine a group of HBCUs with the proper funding to go off and think, how do we rethink our mission in the age of AI collectively? There's no reason for institutions to do this individually. We just don't play well together in higher ed. But it doesn't have to be that way.
So we agree. And what we didn't mention also is that you joined the Ellucian board recently. And a lot of what we talked about is the influence of the transformation in higher education and the role that you could play, knowing that we serve 50% of institutions in the U.S., and that transformation focused on areas like AI. So we're incredibly excited about that partnership and having the influence in these important communities. We just had HBCU week, and a big topic that we discussed was around AI. And the good news is the HBCUs are going to come together in April to convene on AI. And we hope that we'll be able to be there with you too.
Yeah.
But because they're in the surveys will show is there's a deep concern about biases with AI.
For sure.
And the HBCUs were one of the first communities to voice their concern and their need and their interest. And I'm excited because they are going to be a champion of AI that also be, I think, a bit of a watchdog around the biases that we're all concerned it could happen. And that's where humanity and humans need to are at the core of what happens with AI, making the decisions, not AI making decisions for us, but assisting us.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think this is a place where HBCUs, for example, can not simply be a watchdog, but actually take a leadership role, particularly if they partner with companies like Ellucian. Because, when you reached out and said, hey, there's would you be open to talking about a board seat? And, I've had people say, like SIS companies, data companies, these are not companies that I think was like, this is where the game's going to be played. The game is really data. The future is in data. And what I have come to recognize is just how messy, how poorly equipped universities are. Their data often sits in silos, their systems don't talk to each other. So it's such an opportunity for Ellucian to build a platform that knits us together and breaks down those silos and helps institutions with new tools and new approaches to answer better questions and serve their students better. So I welcome the opportunity to join you and the team because this is in fact so critical. And, people want to talk about AI with stuff that's kind of apparent and easy, and in some cases kind of cool and sexy. But the reality is success sits under the hood. And this is the thing that when people ask me about the SNHU story, no one's ever interested in the first 4 years. But it was in the first 4 years that we got into our business processes and we looked at our rules and our systems and our tech stack. And I said, I don't want to spend $1 on marketing if I don't know that we're ready to receive a student who expresses interest. And if it takes us 2 weeks to get back, then we sure as hell aren't ready, right? So we really dug in and went through that process. In like fashion, as we think about universities wanting to use AI in powerful ways, we have to help them get their underlying systems right. We have to help them understand their data better than they do today. We've got to break down those silos. And this is where I think Ellucian can play a really, really important role. And in some ways, it's an invitation for Ellucian itself to reinvent it, right? To think about, as you said, like, you've got teams that are now producing new tools, allowing institutions to do things they couldn't do before.
Yeah.
Mapping competencies and skills to their curriculum in ways that would take them forever if they were doing that in some manual way. So I think it's very exciting. This is the place to play.
You've already zoned in on the issues around data. The number one area that institutions are excited that we see in the survey is around predictive analytics.
Yep.
Because they're struggling to see what is the future going to look like, and if they can harness their data in new ways and guide the institution, more importantly, their students to success. That's what they wake up every day thinking about. So,
and right now, so predictive analytics, the ability to change students' learning experiences in real time based on what that student needs in the moment. So the holy grail of personalization, which you raised earlier, Joe, these are really critical. They have the data they need to build those systems. They just don't have that data in ways that they even know that works together. Like, this is the under the hood work that
and that's really that's part of our
way. Maybe you got me thinking of, Paul, because I think a lot about, especially in curriculum builds, I think about ABC blocks that kids use, and how do I take curriculum and have my blocks where I can pull out the B and put in a T and be able to take out credits or competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities and build my degree as the students are going through it. And then, and the market will see it if you haven't already. Our product journey, I know you recently had. At Ellucian, we have a lot of talk around continuing education with Journey and having a student be able to map their knowledge, skills, and abilities. And then I start going in the other direction. I start going, boy, if I was doing an accreditation visit and I was on a team to recommend a new program for approval, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a printed out skills ontology for me to look at as I look at this degree? What if I'm looking at programs that maybe I need to close because my institution is struggling, and I can back my degree into a skills ontology and say, you know what, these skills are just not relevant for the marketplace. What if I'm trying to create change in my institution as a president, because we know that is not easy. Presidents all the time, you're talking 5 years and they're out. What if I had a catalyst to go to faculty and say, these programs just aren't showing relevancy to the marketplace, because we know there are certain faculty members that will say that their program is great, no matter how many students are in that program or not. So I start thinking about all these other practical applications for a leader to start creating massive institutional change with a product built with a foundation of AI, like Journey. And you just go, it could be mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think our old models of curriculum are about to be blown out, but I think you aptly described what the future could look like. You talk about it from, and rightly so, from a leadership and administrative perspective, but what if we could put those tools in the hands of a faculty member? Because faculty do care about their students and their part, right? And if I can go in proactively and with an easy set of tools say, do an analysis of my current program, give me map the competencies, map that against a Lightcast skills ontology or someone else's skills ontology. Is this still relevant? And it's part of like, why are you still including this? Like, no one does this anymore. Like, oh God, like I didn't know.
The block and put it in a better block, right? I think that's then you're talking about real-time updates.
Capabilities too. That's what we're doing.
Yep, it's perfect.
We want the power to be in the hands of the data, to be powerfully be in the hands of everyone, so that the best decisions can be made, focusing on student success. Student success equals institutional success.
Yeah.
And right now, most in higher education, most businesses really don't have their hands on the data that they need, the different data sets, and AI can help us power the options, not make the decision, but what are my options and time.
Right.
So it's a super exciting time. I know you got to keep us on track, Joe, with our time and Paul's time.
Well, the conversation was so good. I just thought no matter what you guys have going on with your schedules, I just interrupt them.
Yeah, there's one topic that you touched on a little bit about the great things that we can solve for the human challenges around sustainability, but healthcare and specifically mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to get your ideas when you think about AI and there's fear of it, students embracing it. Do you see opportunities for AI to make mental health better?
For sure. On the Matter and Space team, we have a clinical psychologist leading a team of clinical psychologists and researchers on this topic, and really interested in how we can integrate well-being and things that support mental health into the experience of a learner, so that, for example, and the research is pretty clear on some of these things, right? If we can simply get you to exercise is actually a really positive impact or input on mental health. It's as good as counseling in some instances for certain kinds of issues, right? If we can make you more connected, if we can use the structure of a program to connect you to more people, we know that is a mental health benefit, right? Around loneliness, which we have an epidemic of in our culture today. So we're doing things like integrating with Fitbits and Whoop bracelets like the one I'm wearing today, and Apple Watches, and pulling data through those APIs and being able to say to you when you log in at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, hey, Laura, we're about to start this module. As you know, you have had a good night's sleep for 3 nights in a row. Might you be better served to get some sleep tonight and do this tomorrow? And you might say, no, I got to get this done. I just don't have time. And that's okay. But the system might also say, well, you're clearly feeling urgent. In fact, your heart rate is elevated. Would you want to do a 3-minute mindfulness exercise just to kind of get grounded before we jump in? Because you will be bad.
Yeah, that's
right. So these are ways that you can start to integrate, I think, practices that are often kind of secondary in traditional offerings.
And that's exciting because, if the access to that type of healthcare, mental health, which is so important, as you said, is for oftentimes the privileged, but if you could democratize that, so everyone has a coach on health, including mental health, and nudging on things like that, just meditation.
Exactly.
And having people in that journey early versus a crisis. I think it'd be very.
Yeah,
it's a day for me because my heart rate said I was in the 80s on the ready to sleep. So I'm feeling good.
And these don't have to be big additional exercise. So, it's clear from the research in our models is that small interventions, small nudges, use that phrase, we know, for example, if students take only 3 minutes of meditation at the end of a learning session, like from a metacognitive perspective, whatever you learned will actually sit in better. It will sort of take hold more fully. So your learning will improve, but so will your sense of that work. If you combine that with an exercise around gratitude, your mood is better, right? So you can improve the learning, you can improve the well-being of a learner in that moment. And you can do it in ways that don't feel onerous, like, oh, you're asking me to do this thing. I'm already a busy working adult. I don't have time. So we really want to build it in and integrate it. And the key here is that it's braided together, that these are not, I'm shifting from learning. It's like, no. In reality, if your well-being is improved, if your human skills of things like problem solving and active listening are improved, you will be a better learner. And when you have that credential, you will be a better worker, better employee, colleague. So we do think that we have an opportunity to bring these all together. Yeah.
And how do we move that up earlier in life? We're sitting at a time where you see it even in K through 12, or probably not K through, but 9 to 12 at least, devices being banned in the classroom, like kids not having their mobile phones. And the data shows that their grades improved because of focus.
Yeah.
Technology also optimizes, but I think we have to put it in balance, especially as young learners are grappling with so much technology and AI, which is very powerful and fantastic. But we have to balance it with these other
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I take part in is that I feel very critical of what we did and how we rolled out social media in our society. We conducted a massive experiment on our youth, and they paid a terrible price for it. And I
Still paying the price.
we still go back and forth on how much of it is like a lot of the trends that got worse with social media were actually getting worse before the pandemic were happening before the pandemic. A lot of them date back to the advent of social media. We just thought it was cool. Like we weren't having a discussion about it really. I don't think that's happening with AI. I think there's enormous amounts of discussion happening. Algorithmic bias around mental health, around ethics, morality. Perhaps we learned our lesson. And look, it's a sobering thing to remind ourselves that no technology ever invented by humankind hasn't been also used for bad. So we will see lots of pretty reprehensible uses of AI. I just saw one the other day where you can use, there's an AI application that allows you to create a social media circle, a community of other people, but they're only AI bots. So you're not actually like, there's George, who's our co-founder, has 1 million followers on this application.
They're
When they engage, they'll talk, they'll give you likes. That makes it feel good. Like, that's really so. One of the things we've said about space is if we build this so well, and it really does feel like you're engaging with the best teacher you ever had, that people spend all their time in a darkened bedroom thinking they're talking to humans, we'll pull the plug on the project.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is not what we're building. We're really trying to think about how do we use AI to automate and account for knowledge transfer and this kind of traditional core of education so we can actually move our learners into the ontological questions that actually will improve their life. How do we get them out into their communities? How do we get them thinking about the world and themselves differently? How do we get them self-aware in terms of their own tools of well-being? How do we make them more empathetic? And if you look at sort of what's not working really well in society today, I would say it's got a lot to do with those questions and a whole lot less to do with what we know. I mean, how we know is a complicated question in this post-truth society in which we find ourselves. But I think AI can be incredibly powerful for rethinking this. And I know it feels, and in fact, it will get really, like, buckle up. We're in for a pretty wild ride. It's not going to be easy. Carlotta Perez, who I mentioned earlier, says, these can be decades of things being like, this is when governments fall. This is when revolutions happen. When you are changing people's world, it's scary. It doesn't bring out the best in people all the time. And then you emerge out. You emerge into a new, what you would call golden era. And that's happened with every new technological paradigm. So easy for us to say, but like, no, we've got a rough ride ahead of us. But as scary as it is to think about the way AI can upend so much of our world today, how much of our world today is working really well for you? Politics working well? I'm not feeling really great about it right now. Think our K-12 system is working well? Not feeling that way about it. Not blaming here. I'm just saying, do these things work? Is society feeling it's working? Climate change? We're not getting our arms around it. In fact, AI will exacerbate it. Right? Front after front, the world feels safer. So, exactly, right? So the reality is, maybe it's okay. Maybe a little artificial intelligence would be helpful because human intelligence isn't really all that it's cracked up to be right now. So there is a version of this. It's a mindset question, but like not to be a technophile, but with very open eyes and wariness about not letting the bad things happen, we can think about a more hopeful vision of what the future looks like for learning, for universities, and for society generally, if we can get this right.
Well, I think you just defined our last question. What's your big hope? And you outlined that so incredibly well.
Yeah, thank you. It's really that we move from an information economy to a care economy. We learn how to care for each other again.
And speaking of care, we care about what you're doing, Paul. And so tell us where we can follow your journey, Matter in Space, and tell us about the books you've written. You have a very captive higher ed audience here. Tell us how we can follow you.
Well, the pandemic revealed my abject lack of a social life because I wrote 2 books in 21 and in 22. So the first one is Students First, which really was like a system change in higher ed, particularly through the lens of competency-based education and a shift from inputs to outputs, et cetera. But, it was in the middle of that book that I was struggling with a different question. It actually stalled the first book. And the question, as I came down from my study one day, I said, I was like, So I'm really stuck on this question. What's the question? I said, well, can higher ed learn to love its students again? And she said, has it ever? I was like, yeah. Like when I went through my undergraduate experience and I named some of these, like I felt loved. Love defined as I mattered to someone and they cared about me, etc. And that actually led to the writing of my second book, Broken, which actually, frankly, is getting more attention. And that book really became the subtitle of that is How Our Social Systems Are Failing Us and How We Can Fix Them. And I spent a lot of time interviewing people in healthcare, in treatment, addiction treatment, in mental health, K-12, et cetera, and also with psychologists and sociologists. And that's why the first chapter of that book is called Matter. Like do you know Donna Beagle's work, who writes about extreme poverty? She came from extreme poverty and escaped it. She's a faculty member now as a research center. And I didn't get her line quite right, but she says, no one who's ever escaped extreme poverty cites a program, a technology, a system, right? Platform. What they cite? One person. One person who believed in them, who said, you're better than this, who said, you will rise above it. Like, everyone needs a person. Doesn't have to be 5, doesn't need to be 10. In fact, Matt Beal is on the board of Matter in Space. So Matt is local. He's the chair of child and adolescent psychology at Georgetown. And I'm talking about this with Matt. I said, when you think about, I asked him, I said, for the book, who escapes poverty? Who escapes a violent neighbor? Who escapes a dysfunctional family? Like, why is it that so many don't? Every once in a while, someone gets up and it's like, what is it about that person? And he said, it's typically 3 things, and they're not equally important. So one is that they have some passion or interest you can look into. It could be anything. If it's a kid, it could be basketball, it could be fashion, it could be music, but something, astronomy. Second thing is ideally they've had some vision of normal. So they know what they're experiencing today isn't normal. They don't acculturate to it. They don't accept it. It can be that, I'm homeless today, but I remember lives in a house. It can be, I had one of my favorite students who also calls himself the son we never want. We have 2 daughters. He grew up in the poorest, toughest circumstances you can imagine. Father in prison, brother paralyzed from a drug shooting, mother addicted in and out of public housing, homeless. But he was bused to a wealthy suburb of Boston in something called the Metco program, which still exists, which takes kids from poor, often communities of color and buses. And there are issues in that, of course, right? But he saw that he saw what an intact family could look like. He saw what a school could look like when it wasn't crappy, when the books weren't 40 years old, when there wasn't mold on the ceiling, when the radiators worked in the winter. He saw what it meant to get 3 normal, healthy meals a day. And he had a vision for us, like, I want that. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, the most important thing, one person who believes in you.
Yeah.
One person who says you're better than this. And I think when I think about what we're trying to build, we want to leave more space for that relationship with the one person. When I was meeting last fall with the Prime Minister of Rwanda and the Minister of Education and saying, this is what we're trying to build, we would love to test it in Rwanda, because we are trying to guard against hegemonic bias and cultural bias and racial bias. And he shook his head and I thought, well, this isn't going well. I just wanted a couple hundred testers. And he said, if you build this, you build what you described to me, I need millions of licenses. I have whole swaths of my country where there's no education happening today. And the idea that we could give students a device where they get the best, most well-designed, personalized learning possible, like as good as if they went to the best university, but they're now in a classroom with a teacher who's from that community, who actually knows them, who can look at them and say, hey, Laura, are you hungry? Did you eat? And she says, no. And now as a teacher, I am a curator of community. And so those undereducated, underserved, overwhelmed because they have 100 students in their classroom, teachers that have visited in Rwanda and other parts of Africa, now can actually stay focused on the kids and the human stuff that matters and let the learning happen in this way that is a complement to, not the core of what's trying to go on. So I think this is the optimistic vision of what we can do. David on tour at MIT, who again, a favorite writer, talks about the way AI could reinvigorate the middle class. He has a version that I just described to you. Imagine that overwhelmed nurse in a small rural community where there isn't a doctor available, right? Now she has all the foundational knowledge to work with a patient. She can mend a broken bone. She can put an IV in. She can handle your physicality. She has great human skills, better than most doctors. I mean, we like our nurses better than our doctors typically, right? But now, at her side, she has the expertise of the best physician at a Mayo Clinic or a Mass General or Cleveland Clinic, right? So now those people can get amazing healthcare. And she gets to focus on what we want our healthcare givers to be mostly, which is good humans who know us. Right. So that's the whole vision.
That's amazing.
Well, I have to tell you, if you guys were both not busy, which I know you are, I would let this roll because I feel like we've just scratched the surface on these talking points. In fact, probably there's going to be another one of these with the three of us where we can now digest some of the things that we've talked about and then come back and talk some more. I'm not going to outro you guys with your bios. I'm just going to say my amazing co-host, Laura Ibsen, my amazing guest, Paul LeBlanc. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp.